Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific, and how I am pleased to announce you can add up amounts. Put some bounce in your life and start counting now. Ha ha! Yes!
Well, I finally reviewed every episode of the first season of Smallville, and so before we move on to Season 2, let's quickly recap the season and take a little stroll down memory lane. In case it's been a while or for whatever reason you're only watching these recaps for the count at the end and to prove that I really can be concise when I want to, here's the entire first season condensed into 120 seconds or less. There's this meteor shower in 1989 that turns a little Kansas town from the cream corn capital of the world to the meteor capital of the world and somehow doubles its population in 11 years. Jonathan and Martha Kent find a spaceship and raise the kid in it as their own. Now it's 2001, Clark Kent has some superpowers and uses them to save Lex Luthor from a bridge accident after he moves into town to take over a fertilizer plant. Lex becomes fascinated with Clark and they become best friends. Clark works at the high school newspaper with his friend Chloe, occasionally spends time with the token black guy in the show, and shallowly pines after the only girl in town wearing his only weakness around her neck, Lana Lang. Lana has an overprotective boyfriend who strings Clark up in a field. Lana has a tendency to get stalked and attacked a lot, but always gets saved at the very last second by Clark, and always conveniently unconscious so she doesn't notice Clark has superpowers. A whole bunch of high school kids and a few adults get superpowers and go crazy. Many die in fights with Clark, and others just get carted off to the loony bin. There's also the occasional dirtbag who figures out Clark's secret and tries to exploit him for his own gain. Lex tries to learn about the amazing properties of the meteor rocks and how Clark miraculously saved him at the bridge, eventually deciding he likes it in Smallville and defying his father who wants him back in Metropolis. Whitney's dad gets really sick and later really dead, causing Clark to do the only really mature thing he does all season, deciding not to take advantage of the situation and leaving Lana alone. He finally shows some interest in Chloe, which gives Lana love triangle face. He takes Chloe to the spring formal but leaves her there when he realizes Lana's stuck out in a triple mega tornado after taking Whitney to the bus station, who's decided to follow in his late father's footsteps, join the Marines, and start a trend of one season Lana Lang boyfriends. In the storm, Lex's manipulative and psychologically destructive father, Lionel, stares death in the face while Lex hesitates, and Clark runs off to save Lana, who doesn't have enough sense to not get back in a truck in the middle of a tornado. The best thing about this series from the beginning is the family dynamic, the parallels and juxtaposition between the Kents and the Luthors. There's a lot of typical in this show, but what's not typical is getting to see the beginnings of a classic rivalry play out as a friendship in a believable way. It isn't just that Clark is noble and good and Lex is malevolent and evil. Both of their parentages are visible, and Jonathan, Martha, and Lionel are made into distinct and interesting characters. We see what values Clark and Lex were both raised with in a battle between nature and nurture. Clark wants to be like his father, and Lex doesn't. In each episode, where Clark succeeds most often is when he tries to be like his dad. Lex is a much more complicated animal. He would prefer to be more like the Kents, but his interests are in conflict. He has an insatiable curiosity, an obsession with the truth, and that truth is obtainable, but only at the risk of embracing the dark side he's inherited from his father. He continues to fight this inner struggle into the last scene we see him in Tempest. What does he want most? To prove that he can better mankind with integrity and generosity, or to find all the secrets of the universe? And is it possible to become the better man in spite of his father? I could say the worst thing about the season is the Kryptofreak formula and how most stories seem to rely on a set outline rather than natural character interactions. I've talked about that a lot, but there are some episodes like Jitters that are good despite that formula, and toward the end of the season it starts to get away from that. Smallville is one of the most puzzling shows I've ever followed, a total contradiction from the very beginning. How can you have Lex, on the one hand, such a fascinating character study, a pretty sophisticated look into corporate intrigue and corruption on a personal scale, at least for network television, and on the other hand, Lana, a walking cliché, the airheaded, superficial, popular girl who thinks she's deep and complex and no one understands her. She started as the standard cheerleader with pom-poms for brains, and when the show worried she was turning into a stereotype, she surpassed everyone's expectations by quitting the squad and opening a coffee shop in an attempt to evoke sympathy from the audience by making the town the place where her parents met. Nice try, but not only does she come off as a little pathetic, holding on to the material after coming off all along as too superficial, but only a few episodes before this was it established that she makes a terrible waitress and couldn't last a week at the other coffee shop. Pretty early for a retcon, don't you think? Clearly the writers were grasping for ways to make her likable. I don't mean to be insensitive. I get trying to hold on to your parents when they died when you were at a young age. It's just that I already don't find much likable about this character, and I feel like she has almost no personality, so this kind of tactic comes off nearly as a guilt trip. Oh well, at least convincing Lex to back her coffee shop makes her more proactive than Clark, who has almost no hobbies or interests whatsoever. What bothers me most about Lana is what she does to Clark. Clark and Lex's dynamic is very engaging. Even with his flaws and impending supervillainous future, there's a lot to like and even respect about Lex. I understand why Clark is so fascinated with him. But all the way through the season, the only thing that seems to make Clark so obsessed with Lana is her looks and the fact that she's lived next door to him his whole life. They don't seem to have much in common beyond the fact that they're both orphaned, and that's not especially played up past the pilot, at least so far. Clark's got this other girl, Chloe, practically all over him, and she's at least got a personality. Clark tries to act like he's not interested in her because they've been friends too long, but it seems obvious, even to Chloe, that the real reason he wants Lana is because he thinks she's hotter than Chloe is. Luckily, he seems to be growing up a little about all of this by the finale, but of course, we'll see if that holds up into the second season. I get the sense that the show does this because it thinks it's being more relatable to teenagers that way, because that's how apparently teenagers act, as if being relatable is more important than giving kids good role models on television. I've always been of the mind that you can do both, and often this show, at least in my opinion, doesn't really manage either. And now let's go on to the Season 1 awards. There are 10 categories, 5 positive awards, and 5 negative awards. Here we go. The first award goes to the most valuable character, or the MVC, and that is Lex Luthor. He was the entire reason I tuned in and why I continued watching. Michael Rosenbaum is a brilliant actor, and through his nuanced performance, brought an incredible energy and mystery to the show. Next up is the least valuable character, the LVC, or character I'd most like to see jump on a bus out of Smallville. And that's going to be Nell Potter. You thought I was going to say Lana, didn't you? Well, Lana's bad enough, but to have an aunt who's even more shallow and selfish than she is, I mean, at least we know where she gets it from. At this age, I always blame the parents, or in this case, the woman who raised her. For such a minor character, I've had nasty things to say about Nell every time she's been on screen. Put her on the bus, it's time for her to go. And now for the best villain or Kryptofreak. Despite all the superpowered bad guys this season, I'm going with Sam Fainlin, the Metropolis PD cop from Rogue who tries to take advantage of Clark's superpowers for his own gain. He's the villain who made things the most personal for Clark and who most put his life in perspective. Things were never more real for Clark than when Fainlin was threatening his parents and pushing him to the point where he seriously considered using his powers to kill. Cameron Dye, who played Fainlin, got one of the best performances out of Tom Welling in the whole season. Next up is the most underused or misused character. This season I'm going for Pete Ross. We know exactly 3 things about this kid. He's Clark's best friend, he doesn't like Lex because Lex's family ruined Pete's family's cream corn business, and now he's Clark's friend, and he seems to have a thing for Chloe. 21 episodes, part of the main ensemble cast, he's in the opening titles, and that's all he gets. I have no idea why Chloe gets so much to do, looking into Clark's adopted past, being the third point in a major love triangle, and heck, she even gets her own episode in Crush, but Pete's so shafted. Even Whitney gets his own episode, and he's not even going to be a regular in the show after this. It's almost like he's only here because Pete Ross was Clark's childhood best friend in the comics, but nobody has any ideas for how to, I don't know, give him a little character arc, or make him a little less two-dimensional. I'm sensing a theme here. Next up is Best Song. Like it or hate it, Smallville sometimes seems to use as much popular music as it does actual score. This category isn't for the song I like the most that's used this season, but rather the most appropriately placed in a scene to highlight an emotional or thematic beat. I know I just mentioned this last episode, but I'm going once again with What Do I Have to Do by Stabbing Westward, playing while Lex is looking up at his father in a helicopter. Taken out of any romantic context, the lyrics in this song really reflect Lex's inner conflict. He loved to completely forget about his father, but he also desperately wants his father to love him, and we're getting this as Lionel is trying to prove that Lex is completely under his thumb. And now we get to Weirdest Superpower. In Obscura, Lana got the ability to see through Chloe's kidnapper's eyes. Not only is this a really odd and limited kind of power, but it's also the most convenient. It's like having the power to see exactly what the script needs you to, so that the plot points will happen in the right order. And now for Best Comic Book Reference. difference. I was counting these at the beginning of the series, but I realized this category was a little too debatable in some cases, and there are too many of them to expect any kind of accuracy. There are definitely some groaners, but there are also some really clever ones, and I think my favorite has to be at the beginning of the pilot, where Lionel's reading a newspaper and we see a headline about the death of Oliver Queen's parents. That's going to play into the series a lot later. It's a surprisingly good bit of continuity for a show that had a lot of retcons and afterthoughts, but I also love that it's something DC but not specifically Superman right out the gate to show the comic fans the writers know they're watching. And now for worst episode title. Smallville has this weird track record of mislabeling episodes. When you have a formula set up of only using one-word episode titles, it doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to at least call it something related to what happens in the episode. This season, I'm going to pick Hug, the episode where two salesmen have the ability to persuade anyone to do anything just by shaking a person's hand. Not a hug, a handshake. Why isn't it called Handshake? And now for best episode. I gave 4 episodes highest marks this season. Hourglass, Tempest, Jitters, and Rogue. All 4 of those 4 out of 4s. And I love each of them for different reasons. The thing they all really have in common, though, is doing something creative with the show's formula. Either getting away from it completely, or finding a way to use it in such a way where I'm not even thinking about it. But ultimately, I think I'm going to have to give it to Tempest, mostly for Rosenbaum's knock-it-out-of-the-ballpark performance. He made this a really tough cliffhanger to have to wait for 3 months. And now for worst episode. The lowest I rated any episode this season was 1.5 out of 4, and 4 episodes tied for that score too, weirdly enough. Nicodemus, the beginning of the infamous characters who aren't themselves stories we'll be inundated with later on. Drone, where Pete forces Clark into a school election and a girl is so obsessed with winning she tries to kill people with bees. Kinetic, the Kryptonite tattoo episode. And Crush, the episode with the whiny Kryptofreak who's angry because he's paralyzed his drawing hand and has to settle for telekinesis. So do I go for the first big acting out of character story or the first big love triangle with a psychotic murderer episode? That's a tough one. On the principle of the thing, I should probably go for Nicodemus, but man is Crush bad. With the Kryptofreak making a comic book of his crimes and leaving it around to the over-the-top mid-air chainsaw, yeah, I'm going with Crush. And now, finally, the complete up-to-date count. Everything I've been counting since the first episode that I've kept as part of the master list. There have been a couple categories that have come and gone, things I started to keep up with but realized for different reasons weren't plausible categories to keep going with. Each season, rather than starting from scratch, I'm going to add to this master list. So, for example, when we do this season overview with Season 2 and we get to car crashes, you'll see a number for every car crash in the series up to this point and not just this season. So here's the full tally so far. Cue the music. Here we go. There is 1 instance of Clark losing his powers, 1 non-Rosenbaum Lex, 1 instance of Clark hovering or flying, 1 main character Kryptofreak, 2 characters who were upside down, 2 instances of Clark's parents being attacked or kidnapped, 2 references to President Lex, 2 parents killed by Kryptofreaks, 3 love triangles, 3 Lana stalkers, 3 Chloe killers, 3 Kryptonian artifacts, 3 creepy dream sequences, 4 characters who aren't themselves, 5 instances of a Superman S or a shield, 5 rude super speed exits, 5 instances of Clark and Lana in the loft, 6 bad guys who get killed in the fight with Clark, 8 memory wipes, 13 instances of Clark in bullet time, 15 instances of convenient unconsciousness, 15 characters walking away angry, 17 car crashes, 22 instances of Clark being affected by green kryptonite, and finally, 22 Kryptofreaks, which is 1 more than the number of episodes in the whole season. Next week, we begin our quest for Clark's bizarre origins as we venture into Smallville Season 2. Heat vision, Kawatche caves, disembodied hands, oh my!